I better go first on that, say that I'm on the investment committee, and there's a small slice on the investment property we bought. Anyone else? No?
Nothing.
Okay. Moving on to the minutes of the meeting held on the 27th of July. Is everyone happy with the minutes? Any comments on the minutes? No? Okay, minutes approved. Virtual signature for Martin there. Next up is A4, which is the forward program and action tracker. I assume David Hughes is talking us through this. Is that correct?
I can do, Chair. So I'll just get that document up. Bear with me a second. So I think all of the items that were covered in the last meeting have been dealt with and responded to. I just want to check with members that they're happy that they've had all the responses they were looking for. Are they in advance of the meeting all covered by items on this agenda?
Yes. Thank you.
Sorry, I'm losing the hands here. Emma, you're up.
Yes, thank you. I was asking about the Charter for Public Participation. I know the response is in the document, response from the Chief Executive and the Hillsborough Charter, and I wasn't happy with either of those, actually. We're talking about in due course, and actually they're both very, very powerful pieces of very powerful commitments from the Council. And if we aren't overseeing them, and they're just going to be overseen somewhere else in due course by the Council, I don't think that's good enough. I'm really going through the Charter for Public Participation again. There's some very, very serious long-term commitments which we're not doing, and I'm just worried about that. So who's overseeing it? Nobody seems to be overseeing it. They're just going to do it in due course. So I'm not happy about that, Chair.
What would you like to do in there in terms of, you worried about the accountability in terms
of?
I
was told that it wasn't down to our committee to oversee the implementation of these two charters, and if it isn't, fair enough, it isn't. But I can't see who's actually implementing them. You know, the answer was just, well, you know, we're looking at this and we're working on it. And actually, I don't think that's good enough, because you know, the last task force report from the government task force, they said that change was slow, and these two charters are very, very important. They're crucial for pieces of commitment that the Council has made to change, and it's not happening. So I don't know. It's down to you, Chair. If it's nothing to do with us, I'll pursue this elsewhere.
So, Chair, I'm happy to take it back to the Chief Executive and to get more information for Council Dent Code in terms of what's being proposed. I know the Chief Executive is saying that there's going to be a report to Council soon, but I take Council Dent's comment and happy to take that away to the Chief Executive to get some further information.
Yeah, I think Councillor Denko's right. Is we do need a bit more than this, and you know, also I did notice the letter did sort of lack a sort of hierarchy of accountability. You know, it says specific pledges in the day-to-day business lies with all senior managers, etc., etc. You know, really, who does the buck stop with within the Council? Should it really be Barry Quirk?
So ultimately, the Chief Executive. That's right. Yeah. That's head of paid service. Yes. Yeah.
Which that doesn't say in that letter.
Okay.
I think we would like a more accountable letter, and a bit more information on that. It does a bit of brush off if that is it.
Yeah. Happy to take that away, Chair, as an action. Yeah, no problem.
Okay. Thank you. Next question, Liz.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I thought.
Sorry, Ian, can I come back on that one?
Yep. Sorry. Yeah.
Sorry, I'm sorry for not getting you in touch and for interrupting, Liz. Could we have which member of the which executive director is responsible for those? Which leadership team member is responsible for answering, and which scrutiny committee, if it's not us, is going to be overseeing it? If those three questions could be answered in the letter, that would be helpful. Thank you.
Great. Well, I think we're all very much in agreement on this. Thanks, David. Let's see what comes back. And if obviously we can have that by the next committee meeting, which is November.
It is indeed. We'll have that before then, I'm sure. Yeah.
Thank you, David. We'll allow you to deliver that message. Liz, sorry.
Okay, sorry. No, it's just, I mean, I thought most of the points were clear, but there was one you specifically asked, Chair, for a further report once the crisis was over so that lessons learned could be taken forward. And that's not on the list of actions tracker. And I just wouldn't want us to lose that.
Yep.
You know, going
No,
forward.
indeed. Yeah, happy to note that. We'll make sure that's included, but that's on our radar there. But yeah, absolutely right to include it on the list.
Okay, thank you. That's it.
Thank you. One other thing from my side on the forward program. I can't remember when we agreed to look at the Grenfell expenditure. Was it November, or have we moved that out to the next meeting? I can't remember.
So I'm happy to take that away, Chair, to pick up with officers, with Taryn and Mike and colleagues.
Okay, but let's not let that slip off.
No, indeed, yeah, absolutely.
Does that satisfy your question you're going to ask? Yeah. Right. Thank you. Right, moving on. So is everyone happy with that?
Mm-hmm.
On to A5, which is Treasury Management Reports. Mr. Dawson, what's up? Over to you.
Hi, Chair. For those of you that don't know me, I'm Matt Dawson, so I have oversight for the Tri-Borough Treasury portfolio. So you have a full-time Treasury manager working for your council, deploying your Treasury strategy through the year, so part of which is reporting this every quarter. So this might look rather out of date when we're about to start the half-yearly review, but for the sake of a quarterly report, if we could just jump straight in. I'm conscious you've got a busy agenda. In terms of economic background, by far and away the biggest news that's come through was today of the Bank of England actually having a view on deflation and the inherent negative interest rates and potential QE that would be as a result of those moves. And in the inflationary figures to be believed, I mean, it was slightly depressed with the Eat Out to Help Out, because by its very nature, people were paying less for their food, which feeds through to the statistics. So we'll wait and see. The general consensus is it will be a long time before we're anywhere near the Bank of England's 2% target. There is one economist that's predicting a shock hike to 3.5% if the absolute worst happens to Brexit. That remains to be seen. If I could take you to the table at point 2.5. So currently there's a bank rate of 0.1%. Effectively, the money market is pricing in zero rates. In the very short term and for Treasury bills, things have now gone negative. We're not there yet, and I'll explain why, but there is a 50-50 chance of a rate cut to zero if you believe where the forward rates are at the moment. The Public Works Loan Board rates are interesting. Now, essentially, these rates on the table are where we are in terms of now and forecasting into the future to borrow for the council's general fund. If you borrow today for the housing revenue account, you can get a discount of 1% off that rate. There is actually a consultation underway to which we responded, which would bring the general fund rate down 1% to match the housing revenue account. So that makes borrowing relatively attractive in the longer term, as we're under borrowed as an authority. So whilst there's a short-term hit, because essentially you're borrowing at 1.5%-ish and earning close to zero, there is a very good chance that in the medium to long term, 1.5-2% looks a very attractive long-term loan. Over the page at the top of page 3 just shows June versus March in regard to where we had your money. Cash levels had dropped slightly anyway, but where we had deals mature with banks and local authorities, we really shied away from replenishing and rolling over those deals. There's really no illiquidity premium in doing that. And in the time we're in now, why wouldn't we keep a large buffer of cash? So where we say money market funds at 71.7, if we needed that 71.7 tomorrow morning, you can get it. So part of being in a money market is it's instant access. So the only other thing I'd point out there is the fixed term deposit rate is at the moment is artificially high. So the 0.98%, that's not what the market was paying you at that date. It's because we accrue our investment over the life of the investment, and we weren't buying new ones. So that looks high because it relates to legacy deals that were done some time ago. 3.2 just breaks it down into where we held the assets. So all in cash, it's just different homes for that cash. 4.3 just gives the average balance over the quarter. A slight admission on my part here is that the average 7-day rate for April, May, June, those minus numbers are actually correct. The 7-day rate was and is still negative. So that bottom average, I think the minus has fallen off the page there, so that needs to go back in to be corrected. On to borrowing. So what I've already mentioned about borrowing, we really do have to look at the short and long-term implications of borrowing. This report mentions a 40 million allocation, 20 October, 20 December. I wouldn't read too much into that. We have to say that, and we have to model it because we've got a lot of liabilities we need to manage, and a lot of so we need to put those dates in and plan for it. But if gilts move against us on those days, then we can choose to change the lot size and change the term. So I wouldn't, but essentially we'd like 40 million for the housing revenue account. Onto the appendices. Appendix A is just a useful checker back to the Treasury strategy that members signed off. So no matter what happens in this financial year, we physically cannot go beyond £415 million of borrowing. We're nowhere near it, but that's the limit that's set. The rest of the indicators we're well within tolerance. And Appendix B just tends to be something that committees are interested in because it breaks down each allocation, just an analysis to where that money actually is. In regard to local authorities, we're saying no pretty much to everybody at the moment, just because the illiquidity for 3 and 6 months just isn't there. In theory, we could lend out to banks, but at the moment, our policy is to try and keep things as liquid as possible. Well, that was all I had, Chair. I'll take questions.
Well, I'll just start by saying thank you very much for that update. As always, you are extremely prudent, and given our concerns about lending to other councils, I think what you're doing is absolutely the right thing. We have mentioned it before in this committee. Has anyone got any questions? Yeah. Such a good report, no questions. Thank you very much, Mr. Dawson.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you very much.
A6, Paul has magically appeared on our screens. Now, Paul, were you in the discussion earlier when we were talking about having the private meeting now with yourselves?
Yes.
Okay. You happy with that?
Yeah, that's fine, yeah.
Okay, so if we may go into the private meeting, so just members of the committee and those from Grant Thornton should be in, and then when we have finished our discussions, then I will message Mr. Curtis. Thank you very much. Welcome back, everyone. So we're on A6, and we're just going to hand over to Paul, the partner at Grant Thornton.
Thank you very much. So I'm very pleased to present our audit findings report summarising the totality of work we've done for the audit for the across the whole of the Code of Audit Practice for 2019-20, and that's both in respect of the Council's financial statements, but also in respect of the work that we need to do for the value for money conclusion, which is also a key part of the code work that we do. I will draw out the top few points really that I think is worth emphasising and bringing to your attention. The accounts as a whole were presented on a timely basis. Yet again, the quality was good. Lubna and her team work exceptionally hard. The discipline and the project management from the council side is extremely good. Extremely challenging at times, and I think that's also a good thing. It means that there's a good ownership from both sides, from both finance and audit, over the audit, the financial statements, and the back and forth of queries and information, which means that we get through a very complex audit in a relatively good amount of time. And that's evident by the fact that despite being a large London borough and a very complex organisation, the audit is very well progressed. It's nearing its final stages, bar one or 2 points, and that's to the credit, I think, of the finance team and officers at Kensington, because we can't do the audit without your engagement, and the engagement is very good. Key things in terms of the financial statements: we are proposing unqualified opinion on the financial statements for the council and an unqualified opinion on the financial statements for the pension fund, exactly where you want to be in terms of the accounts. There will be no material amendments or amendments that concern us in terms of them needing to be made. Many of the amendments were updates to judgments and estimates made by my management during the audit process. This year, because of the pandemic, the valuation of assets for property assets, pension fund assets, and investment property assets, the valuer has issued a material valuation uncertainty because of the circumstances in place as at the balance sheet date. The management have disclosed that valuation uncertainty within their financial statements, and we're comfortable with those disclosures, and we will emphasise those disclosures in our opinion, so that a reader of the accounts is aware of the unusual circumstances surrounding the property valuations. Within that context, the work has still been done to arrive at the best estimate possible for what those valuations are in respect of those various assets. It's important to stress that the emphasis and matter in our report over those material valuation uncertainties do not constitute a qualification of the opinion. The opinion remains unqualified. It's just a matter that we emphasise to you. We set out in our audit plan at the start of the year a number of significant risks that we would focus audit effort on, where we thought there was most risk of material misstatement in the financial statements, and in all respect, we're satisfied that those risks have been mitigated and they haven't led to material misstatement. Again, exactly the outcome that you want, really, in terms of the in terms of the work that we've done and the quality and credibility of the accounts that were presented for audit. The one bit with the largest part we're still working on is property, plant and equipment valuations, and that is the challenge of getting some of the information from the valuer to enable us to the level of work and level of probing that we need to do as directed by our regulators in terms of the valuation judgments that management has put into the accounts, and we're working with management in order to extract the information as we need it from the valuer. That is the part which we're still focusing on. That being said, the overall valuation process that management has adopted in respect of property, plant and equipment is a good one. Many councils take a selective approach of doing some assets each year, and it introduces an element of risk, whereas the approach taken by Kensington to do all of the assets at the year end minimises the risk of them being materially misstated, minimises the risk of material valuation changes being missed in any particular year. And so we're not anticipating that the remaining work in this area will lead to any form of material issue in respect of the accounts. We also look at the going concern of the council. I think the council's response generally to the pandemic, both operationally and also financially, was good. The robustness of the financial planning in previous years and the rigour of the sort of budgetary monitoring arrangements meant that the council was able to respond to significant additional costs and income losses caused by the pandemic without it having an existential impact on the council. Obviously, that means a lot of the safety measures that are designed to be in place for an event like this have been used, and clearly that wouldn't be inexhaustible. But as councils go, we're satisfied that there's no going concern issue in terms of the council's solvency for the 12 months to come, and indeed in terms of the longer term, medium term financial plans, comfortable with the level of thinking that management has put into its financial plans, the nature of the response and the preparedness that management had for a devastating uncertainty such as this. And again, no particular concerns that we would share with you, other than that generally it is now a much more risky environment for all councils. As London boroughs go, Kensington is well placed to respond. The level of reserves are just above average for London, at least, and for sort of similar sized councils, which is probably the right place to be. In a time of increased uncertainty and increased risk, you do need to have that cushion, and so it's a sign of sound financial management that the council is able to draw on that to weather the storm over the next year or two to come. So I will pause there, and the one thing to add, of course, as in previous years, until the predecessor auditors issued their VFM opinion for 2016-17, none of the ones for the years following can be issued. But what we've done anyway is share all of the detail of what we would be saying, bar the final conclusion in our report. But as in previously, we can't. The actual conclusion itself will need to be withheld until the previous years have been concluded. Happy to stop there and take any questions there are from members in terms of the work we've done, or indeed any of the wider issues that the report raises.
Thank you very much, Paul. And I think I'd just like to start off by saying thank you very much. You've praised the officers at the council, but I think you, as Grant, Fulton, and you yourself and Ellen and a team have done an excellent job. And just to highlight for me that the value for money report I thought was really, really first class.
Thank you.
There has been a growth in the report, but it's all makes for good reading, and a good audit was obviously done. Does anyone have any questions for Paul? Andrew, is your hand up?
Chairman.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. Has Andrew got a question? Your hand's up on the screen. No.
I'm muted. Right.
Oh, you're muted.
No, I'm unmuted. I'm looking at the pension fund, and I'm thinking about private equity investments. Is it the correct understanding that they're valued based on information that was available for the previous quarter end, 31st of December? Yeah, is that right, Paul?
Yes, I believe so. Yes.
Yeah. So I'm just thinking that public markets went into free fall in Q4. We're in the March quarter, and particularly in March. So any publicly quoted investment, you get a much lower value. But on private equity investments, there's a lag effect because you're working on a quarter, perhaps even 6 months behind. I don't know in some cases. Did you look at any valuations subsequent to the values that have been put in the March accounts based on information available at the 31st of December? So I'm just curious to know.
We do, yeah. So our starting point the obviously the audited accounts themselves, but we then do additional work to cover the period up to the balance sheet date to form a view as to whether any subsequent movement would have been material in the period in question, to satisfy ourselves that's exactly the point of your question, that it doesn't mask a material movement that hasn't been detected because of the timing of the audit. And the work that we've done in respect of those, we're confident that individually and collectively the values by the balance sheet date hadn't moved materially from the original position.
Okay. Right. So we've got no investments in hospitality and aircraft or assets which are going to be will be materially affected and likely to be in the long term. That's all. I'm just curious.
Yeah, it's in terms of the investments that there are, and we do place reliance here as on the independent the sources from where we get this information as well. The movements that were in there, they're not material.
Okay. You've looked at it and it's not material, so I'll accept that.
If I may jump in there as well with my sort of investment committee hat on, I can't remember the name of the private equity fund that we deal with. It's slipped my mind, but it is incredibly diversified. It's got investments in other private equity funds, so it's not one private equity fund that has 10 businesses. It's in multiple private equity funds who each have 10, 20, 30 businesses. It's a huge spread of risk.
Yeah,
but I just can't remember the name of who we use.
Okay, fine.
If I could add to that question as well, I think within the pension fund financial statements in the events after the balance sheet date, it describes some of the changes up to the June position. And I think one of the benefits of doing the audit slightly later than in other years is that we're able to consider those positions as well that have been issued since the year end.
Okay,
thank you. Charles.
Yes, thank you very much. Can I ask about the issue about the accounting for the overspend on dedicated schools grant, which I must say I find a little puzzling, because if we choose to spend the council's resources on supporting children in education, we obviously have total power to do so. And the Secretary of State, I presume, isn't going to reimburse us for any overspend. So I'm not sure really what we're hoping to achieve.
Yeah, so this is one of those famous local authority issues that could only arise in a local authority, but it's essentially it arises. So you end up having spent more because you're required to. Then there's not too much choice in it. What that then means is what happens to that essentially to that overspend. Is it one to be borne by the council? Is it one actually it should be almost carry forward into the future year and sit for stake? And actually the government doesn't want it to impact on council reserves, but from the perspective of where does it sit? It absolutely sits within your reserves, and that's where you get the council is caught between a rock and a hard place, to be honest, in that respect, and it's not a material element, and in our view, it doesn't materially impact the level of reserves available if it's deemed to be to come out of the council coffers rather than to sort of be funding to catch up in future years. But it is a quirk of accounting at the moment. As I understand it, the government is looking to put in effective statutory override relatively quickly to deal with the issue, and whether it will or not, it's anyone's guess. But yeah, it's a quirk of local authority accounting that it sits within your balance sheet, and our view, and I think all the audit firms' view, is that therefore it is your negative reserve to offset rather than something which is not your responsibility.
Thank you.
Ian, can I speak now, because I also wanted to talk about it?
Right. Okay. Go for it.
Paul, you're absolutely right, and I've been both responsible for finance and also had the responsibility of this particular figure, which came through at the last minute. I think even actually after 31st of March last year, and it was unexpected. So it was an extremely unpleasant surprise. And you make the point that it's happened on several occasions in the past. But what is meant to fund it? That is my question. And you alluded to it before, but if the management's view is that it's unlawful to be funded from the general fund, but the Secretary of State does not give sufficient funds in their grants, which they give out at the end of each year to fund it, where does it go?
Yeah, that is essentially summed up perfectly the problem. Our view is that it can only come from the earmarked reserve, and whilst earmarked reserves are essentially still, and the only difference between a general fund and the earmarked reserve is at some point members made a decision to earmark them. Our view at the moment is, in the absence of any commitments that it is someone else's liability, then it has to come out of the council's overall funding position, notwithstanding the fact that the Secretary of State has said it would be unlawful if it were to be funded that way. And I think there's no right answer. I think there's nothing that the council could necessarily do that would take this issue away in the absence of a statutory provision being provided.
There is one thing which I don't think I was responsible for it, so I'm going to be an advocate for it. We do have a new special needs school, and much of the increase or the cost for that dedicated school grant is, as a result, directly and indirectly, for the extra cost of special needs children. Given that we will be having, at some stage in this fiscal year, the new Barbie school operational, even if not fully operational, for all the projected numbers of children, I'm not close enough to know what is happening now. The likelihood is the costs in the future will be less than they were this year. That's all I'm going to say. Yeah. It's a likelihood, but I think that is a material note for you to be aware of. And that's all I have to say.
Thank you, David. Next question on the list is Cosette.
My question's been answered. Thank you very much,
right.
Chair.
Okay. Then next is Liz.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much. I mean, we've discussed your value for money work that you've done, and that it's been, as Ian has said, it's been quite comprehensive. But I was in your actual audit opinion, which is public, you just say you cannot formally conclude the audit on economy, effectiveness and efficiency. And I know why, but is there any merit in actually explaining why you can't conclude on that? Because, you know, quite a lot of work has been done on this area, and yet it's just left hanging.
So in the opinion, if it doesn't say the reason why, then I think we will probably add it in, I believe. But the reason is so we can't until we've completed our work. There's I don't see a harm, to be honest, in terms of adding in the specific reason in the report. It's as in the document report that we've shared does give that reason. But yeah, in the draft opinion, I'll take that on board and
okay, thank you.
Add into that as well.
Yeah, I think that'd be helpful. Thank you.
Any more questions? then I think that's it. Thank you very much, Paul and Ellen, for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Nearly another year done.
Yeah.
So I think now it's time to move on to A7, which I assume Mike Curtis is going to talk us through.
Yes, thank you. I'm pleased to present our final statement of accounts. You obviously had the draft accounts in July, and they've now gone through the audit, and we've been talking about that, and you've heard the conclusions of the audit, notwithstanding a number of issues that are, as we've discussed, still to be resolved. I think it's been another good audit, especially as I said earlier, in the circumstances that we find ourselves of having to respond to the COVID pandemic. And I also understand that we're ahead of many other local authorities in terms of the audit, which I think is a credit to both our staff and to our auditors in getting us to this stage. Obviously, the audit deadline's been extended, but we're still well short of that, in forward of that. Overall, though, I would like to commend then the work of Lobna and her team and the whole finance department in producing the accounts. Section 5 of the report sets out the changes to the draft that you saw in July, and I won't read them all out. You have them written there, so can ask questions about them if you wish, but they're the changes that have been agreed. There is one more that I do need to add to those for the purposes of the meeting and for the minutes, and that's that following a review of the information from Human Resources, the nature of redundancies in the exit package note for 2019-20 on page 99 of the accounts have been reclassified to compulsory redundancies. This means that the total in column 1 becomes 48 and in column 2 it becomes 0. So it's a small technical change. Otherwise, can I commend the accounts to you and ask for any questions which I, Taryn or Lubna can respond to?
Thank you very much, Mike. Let's go to questions. So, Liz, do you have a question? You're on mute.
There we go. I need to practice at this, I think. Sorry. Okay, well, thank you very much for giving us the accounts and updating them from the last draft we saw. I really like the update to the CFO introduction. On pages 11 and 12, we refer to the huge financial implications going forward of COVID-19. And I just wondered if we should cross-refer there to page 25 when we look at the outlook and what's actually happening. And on page 22, we say the crisis are too great and would leave the council with insufficient reserves for future use. And I wondered if we needed to expand on that. I don't want to bring up a whole load of points at this late juncture, but I just have a concern about leaving that sort of hanging. And then on page 23, we refer to the possibility of Brexit being extended due to the COVID pandemic. I don't think that's going to happen. I really don't. I think Boris is pretty tied to us going out of the EU at the end of the year. They're just quite minor points, but we're just a bit concerned.
Okay, thank you. Well, we can look at those points. I mean, I think the point about Brexit being extended, I agree, it's not very likely, but it was obviously at the time we wrote it. But I think it is still true that the potential impact can't be forecast with great certainty, which is what it says there. Obviously, I I still don't think we know whether there'll be a trade deal or not, and we actually don't know either what the impact on the council will be, particularly of that. So I think it's almost an uncertainty which has gone out of the debate because of what's happened with COVID, obviously, but it is still an issue for the council going forward. So I think it's important that it stays there, but I agree that it's unlikely that there'll be an extension in the deadline.
Okay.
Thank you. Kazette, did you want to ask a question, or you put your hand up and taking it down now? You're all right.
I had a similar point about Brexit, and it was ever so slightly different. I'm not certain that if we want to make the statement that it would be expended due to the coronavirus pandemic, it might be extended for other reasons. If we were to change the wording there, a very minor point, I would probably just leave out the reference to coronavirus. But I agree that it should remain a risk that stays here. Thank you, Chair.
Okay. Thank you.
And one other thing, which I suppose sort of comes into sort of A6 and A7, there was a question about the property valuations from Emma. I was wondering whether Emma, you wanted to raise a question on that. Now we've got Mike on the line.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Yeah, I was just a bit concerned, should we actually be worried about this? The property is going through a very, very strange time indeed at the moment. Should we be concerned about it? There seem to be problems with the valuer that we're working with at the moment, getting information. We need full accountability. We need to know what we've got, what we haven't got, what we're about to sell, what maybe we should sell, what we definitely mustn't sell, what we have to hang on to, what we have to use better. And I'm not convinced that we're using a lot of our property assets as well as we should. They should be better used to keep things ticking over, but without a very, very full and accurate and up-to-date audit on all our land and property. I'm convinced we've got little pockets of land everywhere. Maybe we haven't, but we have had in the past. We've had little pockets of land we should be doing something with. Let's not sit on. This is not the time to sit on things. I just want to know where we are. I have lots of concerns. If I'm wrong, that's fantastic. I would rather be wrong. But I don't think we're using our assets, our material assets, as well as we should be. We need that absolutely 100% accurate audit tomorrow, actually. How do we do that? How do we achieve that?
Yeah, and I think also there was a sort of general concern from the committee that the valuers haven't been acting very quickly to get us the information that the auditors need, and no doubt that you need. And what were your thoughts on that, our valuers, and are they doing a good enough job?
So undeniably there have been some issues over the course of the audit, but my understanding is that those are now resolved and we will get the valuations we need very soon. So so I think the situation there is resolved. I think the broader question, so that's about the valuation of the assets essentially. There is obviously a much broader question about the impact of COVID, in particular on our assets, including our operational assets, and these are all things that we're looking at beyond obviously the scope of the accounts. Really, we need to look at what assets may be needed in a post-COVID world, and we were already obviously looking at our assets in terms of making better use of them for social investment and for housing, and that's the whole reason that the Housing and Social Investment Department was set up, and is they're now developing a strategy for making better use of the council's assets. I mean, that obviously goes far beyond the valuation issue.
Absolutely, and just to say, I contacted the director, Anna Benbow, who's in charge of that. We were talking earlier at the last meeting, I think, about the Kensington Town Hall, the Great Hall, and the renting and all of that kind of thing. And that's absolutely classic case where it needs updating, and then we would make more money out of it. And these things are things that we should, obviously that's discussed in property committee, but this is something from the strategic level we need to bear down on that. We need to make sure that happens. And I've been watching our public spaces in the middle of Kensington just deteriorate for years and years and years. It's ridiculous waste, and we've hemorrhaged money in other areas, and this is an absolutely valuable resource that is being wasted, and that's something I think we should, from a strategic level, we should comment on from this committee. Is that correct, Chair?
Yes, I mean we had a pretty in-depth dive into this in the last meeting with the property team, and I know we will definitely have them on the agenda again, probably sooner rather than later, because obviously they're in a slight state of flux. But it is definitely something as a committee we need to keep a very close eye on. Yeah,
absolutely. And it's as we was just saying that it's the social value as well. So that we need to get that balance right. And there's a lot of people desperate for places to meet, and we need to make enough money so that those can do it. So that's that is also part of our commitment, really, and that's of our. The charters we signed up to and the cultural change we're supposedly going through, which I see no evidence of at all. Sorry, I'm sure it's happening, but I haven't seen it. Anyway, thank you.
Thank you. And Mike, if you could maybe discreetly let the valuers know that their tardiness has come to the attention of the committee, and we don't really want to hear, that they are not adhering to timelines next year. So perhaps that will get them more motivated.
Will do.
Does anyone have any more questions? And bear in mind that we as a committee are okaying these accounts, saying that on Mike's opinion, that these are true and fair accounts, and we then as a committee, alas, signed by myself, have to sign below his name saying that we agree these are true and fair accounts. Is everybody happy for me to sign?
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Yes.
Yeah. Yep. Great. Then I think that's the end of A7. Thank you very much, Mike and Lubna and the rest of the team. And once again, exceptionally difficult times, and your team has done very, very well indeed, and have got nothing but praise from the auditors. Even in our behind-the-scenes meeting directly with the auditors, they were extremely complimentary about your team. So thank you and well done.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Right. Next up is A8, which I presume we've got David talking, have we?
So, Chair, if it's okay, I'm going to ask Moira Mackey, who's my head of audit, who authored both reports, to introduce the reports to the committee for you.
Perfect. Thank you.
Good evening. Thank you, Chair. Hi. The item A8 is brought to you each year. It's the update of the internal audit charter and internal audit strategy. Just to sort of outline for you, and it is in the beginning of the charter, in the first paragraph about the purpose of the charter. That sort of outlines the reason why we have an internal audit, the roles and responsibilities of not only ourselves, like for example David, but the Section 151 officer, which is Mike Curtis, and other senior officers, and of course the audit committee. We comply with the public sector internal audit standards, so we have put some definitions in there for you to help you know who sort of fits into which role. And as you will possibly recall, there was a chair's report on the audit committee which came to the February meeting, which would have been done in line with the expectations of the audit charter. I wasn't really going to say much more on that. On the audit strategy, that explains really how we do what we do and the process at a very high level, and the expectations for us to be able to deliver our service to the council. We have the only main change in that is we've added a section on the impacts of COVID-19 on the actual audit plan and how we're addressing that through the work that we do through the rest of the year to ensure that we are able to give you an assurance opinion. And that's it really. I'm quite happy to take any questions on it. You're muted, Councillor.
Nightmare. Thank you very much. If I may make one observation on page 6 of 7, under the internal audit remit, you've got in there drive organisational change to improve processes and service performance. Just a question, do you feel you have the power and authority to do that? Is the organisation listening to your driving of them?
I might have to ask David to answer this question, but because David has quite a much higher level role than myself, and he's involved in a lot of the change process. But David, if you want to,
I think, Chair, to reassure you in the committee, we are actively engaged in a number of projects across the council in terms of helping to drive that change, and we're doing that in part through the way in which we are obviously managing the strategic risk register and reporting on risks. I think through the COVID-19 pandemic, we have been front and centre involved in those arrangements as well to support and advise management on changes in processes, new processes being set up, including the hub. And obviously now we're looking at the outbreak control plans, which are in place, and how those would deal with a second wave or local outbreak, and also the local track and trace arrangements, which are being developed as we speak. So I think we are very much listened to and I think respected within the organisation, and we are helping to provide value, but also support and advice to officers in putting in place the right systems and processes.
Good, thank you very much. That's reassuring, and presumably everybody knows that you can come to us if you don't feel.
Absolutely, yes. Indeed.
Thank you. Does anyone have any questions for Moira or Cosette? You've got a question?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I was curious, just building on that point about organizational change, how does the output from your work get considered as input into the risk register and its potential update?
So again, we meet on a bi-monthly basis with the executive management team, meet as a risk and control board every 2 months. So we feed in the work that we're doing and the work we're proposing to do into the consideration of the strategic risk register. And that, in fact, we had our last meeting yesterday, so we'll be bringing in the next iteration of the register to you at the next meeting. So we're very much involved in those discussions, shaping the work that we do in terms of providing assurance, but also other sources of assurance, both within and outside the organisation, which help to shape the strategic risks that we're facing and how we're mitigating them and what further action we need to take.
Thank you. That's everything from me, Chair.
Thank you very much. I'm muted now. It's rather annoying how this mute button comes off your screen, isn't it?
It is.
Right. So then I think if everybody's happy, we can move on to A9.
Thank you, Chair. That's me again. We would normally give you a progress update at this time of year, where you'd see a number of audit reports that have been issued. It was a very small period of time since the last committee, as you'll probably recall. It's only a couple of months. Unfortunately, in that very short space of time, we haven't been able to finalise any new work, although we do have work ongoing. You may recall that we did pause the audit plan for the first 3 months of the year to enable us to refocus our plan to meet the requirements of not only the services but also of our own requirements because of the COVID impact. So what we've prepared for you here is an update of what we are doing at the moment. I know there was a concern expressed at the last meeting that some work hadn't been started or been carried forward into the current year. Well, we have managed to start some of that work, which is good, and some of it is actually at draft report stage, due to be finalised soon. And as David mentioned earlier, we are involved in things like the test and trace and the verification of certain grant payments and things like that. So we have been involved in other things which are quite important because it's a very fast-moving situation, as I'm sure you're aware. And we've also identified in there the various pieces. The team was significantly involved in redeployment at the COVID hub, helping your residents to get the support that they require. But what I have done is attached an updated version of the audit plan, which we also talked about at the last meeting, and I know that the members wanted to see that. We've slightly refocused it so that we're doing a lot more cross-departmental or service reviews to try and get good value and assurance across the whole council. And we're also doing work where we're using data analytics to try and focus our resources in key areas of risk. So I'm happy that the plan is focused. We've consulted with all of the executive officers to make sure it's in the right areas, and just quite happy to take any comments or questions on that.
Thank you. If I may start with a question on the paying of grants, and sort of the vast amounts of money in general that has been paid out by governments, both national and local. There are, as many of us predicted, things started to come out of the woodwork. I think out of the 35 billion paid out, they reckon 10% is either fraud or paid out wrongly, which did make me think about what we're doing, what we've done, and how large is the risk here for us? I know we are largely the sort of facilitator of the payments, but what are we doing about that?
So Chair, if I can on that. So Taryn and I work very closely together, and with the business rates team in particular. So the council has given something in the order of £231 million of business rate relief for 2021, and about £43 million in business rate grants to a range of businesses in the retail, leisure, hospitality sector and to small businesses. We've worked very closely with the team, and my fraud team particularly been involved in vetting applications before payments are made, so that we actually are carrying out lots of pre-payment checks. Now, the government were obviously keen to make sure that authorities paid as quickly as possible, and we took the prudent view that we should carry out checks before payments were made, so that we weren't the quickest. So the league tables the government publishing early on, we weren't at the top, but then those at the top are now starting to try and recover sums because they shouldn't have been paid out. So we are also going now through the process of finalising all the payments for the discretionary grant fund. There's another £2.2 million going out there to small businesses who weren't picked up by the original business rate grant, and we're carrying out a series of post assurance checks that government have advised in the guidance across all of these grant streams. So that will include things like making sure those businesses are still there, making sure they're trading, making sure that that going to check that some of the money's been spent on what it was meant to be spent on. So we've got a robust process in place, really, both in the lead up to making payments and in making sure once payments are made that they have gone to the place they should and are being used for the purposes they should be used for.
Thank you. That's reassuring. Anyone else? Any questions? Sorry, Councillor Lindsay. I know you can't resist a question when we get to the love a bit of risk. And
thank you, Ian. My question is, can you just explain the relationship between 4.3, the audit work in progress, and pages, the audit plan 7, 8, 9 and 10 and 11 and 12? And I absolutely get that most of it is high in terms of priority. But why are we doing medium priority work when there's clearly a... sorry, my son is asking me to come down for supper, so I got to...
Well, we'll try to be quick then, Councillor.
So why are we doing a certain amount that is either to be confirmed or medium, when actually it strikes me as being here an awful lot of work?
Yeah.
My final question is, how much work, how much capacity is going to be required to do all that work?
So two really good questions, Councillor, which I'm happy to pick up in the first instance. So if we look at page 8 as an example, I think you've picked up schools there in particular. So we are effectively bound to undertake some schools' work each year. We've changed the way in which we do this, so we are typically not carrying out full school audits in the traditional way we would used to do because of the resource it takes, but we are targeting the schools we think ought to be receiving some audit attention and looking at focused work when we do it. So we wouldn't see them as being high risk in terms of the council's sort of risk profile, but we are expected to carry out work. Now, I know there's a consultation by government earlier in the year that suggests we might be required to carry out schools audits every 3 years. That's not come to fruition yet, but we know that most local authorities will carry out some work on their schools base each year. So we have to have a view to sort of a rounded plan, as well as it being risk-based, making sure that we're not missing out areas completely that are not inherently high risk, but we're making sure we're getting that coverage across the board.
If I could add to that, David, as well, all of the schools there, and it's quite a long list, unfortunately, haven't been audited for 5 years. Yeah. So we did change our programme to be every 5 years, but with some thematic reviews in between. And we've also added in an extra piece of work on that. But the programmes are being very focused for each of the schools, because obviously they're under a lot of pressure as well.
That's helpful, Maura. Thank you. And in terms of our capacity, as Maura alluded to earlier in the strategy, we're looking at ways in which we can, across a number of areas, use data analytics. So we're placing less burden on those we're auditing, but also we can carry out more testing in a more efficient way. But we're also carrying out a number of cross-cutting reviews. So rather than focusing in depth on certain risk in a certain department, we're looking at a risk across the organisation and taking samples across the organisation. So again, we're actually using our resource more efficiently. We're getting better audit coverage, hopefully, as well, by carrying the review out in that way.
Thank you.
Thank you. Has anyone got any more questions? Everyone's been alerted to David's supper, so they
you know what, Ian? I'm on everybody's WhatsApp, and I said that so that we would make sure that we finished short before 8 rather than short before 10.
Yeah.
Well done, David. Well done.
It's much better. I think it's much better having these meetings at 6 o'clock now, because that sort of brings things forward a bit. But I normally have sort of tea with my sort of 5-year-old and 7-year-old at sort of 5:30, which I wolf down before we start, not knowing how long these things are going to go on for. But I think that wraps up the agenda. Thank you very much to all the officers and members on the committee. And thank you very much to Martin Carver, who is always in the background, beavering away, transcribing everything so excellently for us. And that is it. Good night. See you in November.
Good night.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you. Thank you, committee.